Relations. Just wanted to give just a quick overview, be glad to take any questions. At the peak of the storm for us, we had about a quarter of our customers in Forsyth County that were without power. The majority was kind of the north part of the county, north half of the county, but we had impacts throughout the whole triad. The storm seemed like affected the most for Duke Energy in North Carolina. Hendersonville got hit pretty hard, but then the triad, just throughout the triad. And probably about the north, like I said, north half of Forsyth County, central Stokes County, and central Rockingham County had huge impacts with the storm. For the northwest Piedmont triad, we had about 51 broken poles. Over 300 spans of wire were down. This was due mainly to trees falling, mostly pine trees outside of our right-of-way easements. For the triad, we, for the most part, tripled. Normally, our native, if you look at the whole triad number of resources, we have a little over 800 resources. That's line workers, contractors, tree crews, engineers, general staff. We tripled that to almost 2,400 personnel that came to respond to the storm and restore power. Got a good start on it Sunday morning with crews coming in from a lot of other locations. And we really do appreciate the partnership with emergency management, police, and fire departments. We work closely with those folks. We had a lot of roads down. The fire department can't trim trees if there are power lines tied up into those tree trimming. So we try to help. They try to help us prioritize. Obviously, we can't get to all those 300 plus locations at the same time. So we had a great partnership with working with local officials as well. It just seems like for us, the triad has really sort of been in the bullseye. When you go back to Hurricane Michael, the snowstorm in December, and then this storm, we've just kind of been the center of getting the most severe impacts of the storm. So those are just kind of the general things I'd like to share. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Where were the 51 down poles?
All over. I mean, that was, the question was, where were the down poles? It was all over. Like I said, primarily the biggest impact was sort of the north part of Forsyth County and Stokes County, and then central Stokes County and southern half of central. It's just something like that. That area had the most ice. But we had broken poles in the foothills, Elkin, the Wilkesboro area as well.
And just unfair when you said the spans of lines, that's just the lines between each pole.
Right, yes, yeah. Typically what happens, a tree falls in between those spans and breaks the wire, and we hope it's just the wire. Often, like I said, 51 of those were broken poles as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Osman, Chief of Forsyth County Emergency Services. I oversee 3 divisions: the 911 County 911 Center, the County Fire Department, and the City County Emergency Medical Service, EMS. I'm going to talk just very briefly about both storms. The winter storm in December caused us a lot of issues in regards to mobility, getting around just like everybody else, driving in the snow. We had a lot of ambulances that were getting stuck. One of the things that we do is we put our personnel in storm mode, and what that basically means is we operate all of our available resources, all of our ambulances, our fire trucks, and we bring extra personnel, and we spread those personnel out to help with response times, because one of the things that we do not do when the weather gets as it was in both storms is we do not run red lights and sirens to emergencies. And the reason we do not do that is it actually causes more issues and more problems for us in regards to if we're trying to get around traffic, they try to get out of the way, they spin out in front of us, they get in a wreck. We can't get to where we need to go, so we actually cause more issues and more problems just by running red lights and siren, because we can't go that fast anyways, and the red lights and siren doesn't make the truck go any faster. So we do not run red lights and sirens to the emergency or to the hospital. But we worked very closely with Duke Power and the North Carolina Department of Transportation to assist our fire departments in both storms as far as getting around roadways that were cleared. Our 911 center works very closely prioritizing and coordinating those efforts with the power company. One of the biggest issues that we had with the ice storm was, of course, all the downed trees blocking roadways, which does two things. It causes us to try to find different routes around calls that we're trying to respond to. So by prioritizing those calls through our 911 center and letting Duke Power know that these specific main roadways need to be cleared so that we can get to the needs of the citizens depending on what their emergency is, was a high priority. We basically had roughly around 152 trees down in roadways that we had to prioritize and determine which roadways needed to be cleared before others could. And we had several public service requests, which basically surrounded people needing to get to the doctor's offices and really low priority things as far as our eyes were concerned, or needing to get to different places, and they were trying to use EMS to get to where they needed to go, and we had to prioritize those, and a lot of those requests we couldn't meet simply because of the high call volume. So our daily operations from the EMS perspective was basically the same in both storms. The only difference with the ice storm was the related trees that had fallen, which was substantially more than in the ice storm than it was with the snow event. So I'll entertain any questions that anyone may have.
Can you just tell me how you went about prioritizing which roads needed to be cleared first?
The question was, how do we prioritize which roads needed to be cleared first? Well, when we get the call, and we get a call from a citizen saying that there's a tree blocking the road, if it's one of the main thoroughfares into, like, for example, some of the interstate highways, the main roads like Renolda Road, Country Club Road, just to mention a few of those type roads, they sort of take a higher priority than a tree that's fallen in a neighborhood and blocking a neighborhood. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Aaron Noah, Battalion Chief from Winston-Salem Fire Department. During this past previous storm coming in, the fire department experienced a large number of calls due to power lines down and power outages, along with a lot of fire alarms, which taxed the fire department greatly. During this peak of the storm, we took staff and manned some light-duty vehicles with chainsaws and personnel to go around to assist City Public Works and opening up some streets, and also making sure that the down power lines that we had were in an area that were safe, making sure that people around them were notified. You know, we do have a power line that was down, and make sure that those areas were safe. So I'd like to use this time to make sure that you know that when you come to a down power line, do stay away from them. Treat that line as it is live. It is not dead until we have Duke Energy on the scene and they have the power secured. So if you see that down power line, please, number one, don't walk around it, walk over it or touch it, and don't drive over it. Find an alternate route. So we also are not immune to these trees being down. As we've seen with the last couple of storms, we do have power outages at the fire stations. We did have generators supplying power, and we also had one tree to fall on a fire station causing minimal damage. So, you know, other than the public receiving damage and causes from the storm, we too had a little damage from this previous storm. Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Which station received the damage?
Which station had damage? That was fire station number 9 on Ogburn Avenue. Minimal damage from a tree. I think it damaged just a little bit of roofing in the gutter. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Hello, I'm Officer Richardson with the Winston-Salem Police Department Traffic Enforcement Unit. I was asked to speak just briefly on some of the things that we saw during this winter weather issue. A couple things that the traffic unit and other patrol officers experienced. We saw people driving too fast for the conditions. obviously, which led to a lot of traffic collisions. Another thing that we saw is people driving around yellow police tape, where we had several roads blocked off. Saw a lot of people taking it upon themselves, maybe one of the passengers getting out of the vehicle, lifting up the police tape and driving through in a road that was not safe for travel. And then a third thing that was a major thing that I want to touch on the most is our intersection confusion. Several intersections were, the lights were out due to the power outage, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first of all, I want to thank the media for getting ahead of the storm and basically advertising that it was on its way. That helps us out a lot. It lets the people know that it's coming, and it lets them prepare accordingly. And that is one thing that we want to make sure you stress, that if you have to get out in winter weather, make sure you plan accordingly. Make sure you allow enough time, prepare alternate routes, make sure your vehicle is prepared, make sure the tire inflation is at the proper level, all the fluids are topped off. Make sure that you have complete visibility out of all of the windows. We see a lot of that during this time. Maybe the defroster only has half the windshield clear, and people are trying to drive in the winter weather with low visibility out of their vehicle. That creates a lot of problems. But let's talk about the intersection issue that we experienced here in Winston-Salem. According to General Statute 20-158B6, basically this sums up how to treat a intersection where, whether it be a major intersection, any four-way intersection where there's a traffic light. How do you treat that when all the lights are out, the power's out due to a power outage? Basically, the statute reads this: when a traffic signal is not illuminated due to power outage or other malfunction, vehicles shall approach the intersection and proceed through the intersection as though such intersection is controlled by a stop sign. So you treat an intersection where the power's out as though it's a four-way stop with that is taken care of by stop signs. I wrote down a few scenarios that pretty much, there's three scenarios that can clear up this whole issue. The first scenario, you have two vehicles that approach an intersection at roughly the same time, but one vehicle gets there just maybe a second or two before the other vehicle. They both come to a complete stop. Who has the right of way? In this scenario, the vehicle that gets to the intersection first always has the right of way, no matter if they're turning left, right, or going straight. Okay? Second scenario, two vehicles arrive at the intersection at the same time. One, say for example, traveling north on Peters Creek, and one traveling west on Silas Creek. So they're not going this way, they're coming to the intersection like this per se. Who has the right of way? If they get there at the exact same time, you always want to yield to the person on your right. Okay, so in this case, the vehicle on Peters Creek, if they were traveling north, and a vehicle traveling west on Silas Creek, if they get there at the same time, you would yield to the person going west on Silas Creek, because that would be to the person's right on Peters Creek, if that makes sense. If you need clarification for that, I printed off some diagrams that could help that. Scenario 3, and this one is when two vehicles arrive at the intersection at the same time, one traveling north per se, one traveling south per se, on the same roadway. They get there at the exact same time. Who has the right of way? Well, at this point, it depends on whether the vehicle is turning left, going straight, or turning right. The order of operations for this is quite simple. The right turn always goes first. The person going straight goes second, and left turns are always last. So those are just the scenarios where if someone gets there at the exact same time. It's rare that that happens, that someone gets there at the exact same time, but again, it goes back to the first scenario. If someone gets there just slightly ahead of someone else, that person always has the right of way. Treat it as a four-way stop, and if you have any further questions on that, we'll be glad to entertain any questions on that. Yes, sir.
I think some people feel that when you, like, for instance, University and I believe Battalion was a big problem, that intersection. I think some people feel that when they are traveling on the major road, that they have the right of way no matter what, and they can simply just go through the intersection.
Okay. The statement or question that was raised was, you have a intersection like University and Battalion, where University being the major thoroughfare, people feel that they have the right of way on University opposed to Battalion. That is incorrect. According to North Carolina General Statute 20-158B6, that you must treat that intersection, no matter whether it's University. Yes, if the lights are working, yes, everyone in their right mind understands that that is the major thoroughfare. But according to statute, when the power is out, for safety and clarification, so everyone's on the same page, that you have to treat that as a four-way stop, no matter what the roadway or anything. If it is a power outage and a traffic light four-way intersection, you got to treat it as a stop sign. Yes.
Just to follow up, so,
Mhm.
and I think I understand the reason why, but we were kind of told that the Winston Police Department, it's not really their responsibility to man these intersections and direct traffic. Can you explain why, or at least at some of the major intersections, why there wouldn't be an officer or officers there directing traffic?
Okay, the question was, why is there not an officer at every intersection due to the power outage out there directing traffic? And it's quite simple, that there's so many crashes that are dispatched during times like this, that we're out there trying to make sure the motoring public is safe. Because a lot of times we're going to these crashes, we're not sure if someone may be entrapped, maybe it's a 1050 PI or a crash with injuries. So we need to get to that and make sure that the people that we know have been involved in a crash, that they're safe, that we can make sure that they have help on the way, opposed to being out there directing traffic. Now, if we get all the crashes taken care of and our calls for service there's no calls for service pending, at that point, yes, we will be out there directing traffic. But calls for service, certainly crashes during this time, take priority over us directing traffic.
And even like maybe just stationing a car as a deterrent at some of these intersections, is that hard to do as well?
Well, really, the question was, why can't we just put a police car at some of these intersections as a deterrent? It's not our practice to park patrol cars with our lights on unmanned, because, that's our office, so to speak. That's what we have to use to travel ourselves. So, and also it creates a lot of confusion. If people just treat the intersections as a four-way stop, there's stop signs there, it really simplifies things. Okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
All right, good afternoon. I'm August Vernon, the Director of the Winston-Salem Forsyth County Office of Emergency Management. And again, we'd like to thank you for attending today's briefing. And before I get to my direct notes, I do want to follow up with what was just mentioned about travel. During the hurricanes, we had to ask people to slow down, be patient. We had individuals driving around barricades into flooded streets. And again, we would warn the public not to do that. During the winter weather events, people were driving very unsafely in times that even we would have our vehicles in four-wheel drive and cars would still come and ride on your bumper, again, being very unsafe. So we would just remind folks in those type of events to just be patient and slow down and use caution. So we're here today to talk about the fact that in the past 4 months, we've had 4 major severe weather events impact Forsyth County in the Triad. More importantly, we want to briefly discuss how citizens can prepare for these type of events. The first event was Hurricane Florence, which impacted the Triad on September 16th. Less than a month later, on October 11th, we were impacted by Hurricane Michael. We then transitioned to winter weather, and on December 9th, we saw a record 14 inches of snow fall across the Triad in a 24-hour period. This was followed by a quick-moving ice storm that impacted our region last weekend on January 13th. And today, while we're sitting here, we're now planning on an Arctic cold front to move through the Triad this Sunday evening, Monday morning, that could drop temperatures into the teens and possibly into the single digits. And on top of all the moisture and the trees falling and those type of issues, we can already expect, we know we may have some problems again in our community. This is important because each one of the 4 previous weather events I just mentioned caused widespread power outages, hundreds of trees to come down, major transportation corridors to be blocked, large number of vehicle accidents, school and businesses to be closed, and a very high volume of public safety 911 calls. And that was whether it's a hurricane event or winter weather. These 4 events also definitely had a huge impact on the citizens of Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, and the Triad. and we still have the potential for several months of winter weather ahead of us. And again, we want to remind everyone the Atlantic hurricane season starts on June 1st and runs until November 30th. So what we wanted to briefly talk about is how citizens and communities can be prepared for these type of events we're talking about. An informed community is a prepared community. We ask that you plan ahead so you, your family, your business, and your community is prepared for the events we're talking about. Also, remember that public safety agencies and first responders may be responding to a very high volume of calls and emergencies during these storms and may not be able to get to you as quickly as normal. Emergency response is likely to be delayed during a storm, again, whether it's tropical storm or winter weather. It is important to have these conversations now with your families and neighbors because the middle of a hurricane, a tornado, or an ice storm is not the time to try to figure out what you're going to do. There are three very simple things we want everyone to remember. Make a plan, build a kit, and stay informed. I will very briefly discuss each one of these three items. First, make a plan, being aware of what disasters and hazards could affect your area and developing a family preparedness plan. Learn the type of disasters or emergencies that may likely occur in your area. These can range from affecting only you and your family, such as a home fire or medical emergency, to those affecting the entire community, like an ice storm or flood or the storms we're talking about. Also make very specific plans for children, pets, the elderly, those with special needs. Build a kit means being equipped with proper supplies you may need in the event of an emergency or disaster. Something as simple as, do you have cash on hand, as we were talking about earlier. Remember, ATM machines and banks may not be open or working. Keep your supplies in an area easy to carry emergency preparedness kit that you can use at home or take with you. Think of the very simple items you may need, such as food, water, medication, flashlights, batteries, battery-powered radios, and any other items you may want or need. Stay informed, and the media is a big partner of ours in this, is how do we keep the public informed? You need to identify how local authorities will notify you during a disaster and how you'll get information. Again, you could lose Wi-Fi, you could lose power, you could lose cable. There are items, know the difference between weather alerts, such as a watch or warning, and what the differences are. Again, plan ahead how you're going to get information, because we will be putting information out. So as I mentioned before, make a plan, build a kit, and stay informed. Again, these are three simple steps that each family and community member can take to prepare for severe weather events and other types of emergencies or disasters we could see in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, or the Triad. The most important step, we think, is just to do something. Start having this conversation with your family, your friends, your loved ones, your community now, before another storm occurs. There's several resources where you can find additional information. You can do research online. You can go to your local library. You can contact your local Office of Emergency Management and other community partners, such as the American Red Cross. There are three websites I would like to share with you, and they're all very similar. The first one is readyforsyth.org. The second one is ReadyNC, and the other one is ready.gov. That is your local, your state, and your federal websites for information. Hopefully these very brief talking points will help you and your family, point you in the right direction for starting to plan for disasters and emergency. And remember, an informed community is a prepared community. Thank you again for this opportunity, and do you have any questions at this time? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if it's for you or someone else, but what areas in the county still have, trees down, someone's working to take care of?
I think based on the past the question was, where do we still have trees down in the Winston-Salem, Forsyth County area? I know based on the past 4 storms over the past 4 months, those trees are everywhere. Most of the roadways, or pretty much all the roadways, have been cleared, but you'll still see trees and the debris left on the side of the road. That takes a little bit more time. The priority is to get the roads open. Obviously now, though, the concern is, with this weekend, with more freezing temperatures coming, and if we get any moisture on top of that, So I would say it's pretty widespread. It's not been centralized to one location.
More in the northern part of the county?
If I had to balance it out, typically the northern part of the county, especially with the winter weather events, appear to be seriously impacted.
And whose responsibility is it to clear those trees and brush?
So whose responsibility is to clear those trees and brush? It really depends on where it's happening. In the municipalities, the municipal DOT will handle or the municipal, streets or DOT departments will handle those. The state will maintain some of those roads. It just really depends on where it's at and who's responsible for that.
Is there a timeline on when it'll be cleaned? So that during hurricane, not a big issue, the trees just got cleared up like a couple weeks ago, or like the debris. Now again.
The plan is to always get these done as quick as possibly, but again, with having 4 storms like this back when we may typically see one storm in a season, and again, the question was just, how long do we think that'll take to clean up? With 4 storms like this has basically been, we're trying to play catch up with it, and again, we still have several months of winter weather to go. But the priority is always getting the primary and secondary roads open. That's the priority.
With, before the storm, I think the general consensus was that there aren't enough machines, there isn't enough machinery to clear all the roads because of the irregularity with which these events happen. Will that continue to be the case? And if so, what would it take to say we need to invest in more of these stuff?
So I think with the volume of these storms and how widespread they are, we've really seen recently we've had an unusual amount of trees down, and I think some of that just because of the amount of rain and flooding and just generally even before we had storms, so that causes a higher number of trees to go down or vegetative debris to go down, which creates power outages and other issues. So we do have I think the appropriate amount of resources to respond to them. And I will sometimes hear, well, up north in an ice storm, and talking to our counterparts in up north, they still deal with the same amount of issues, even if they have a higher number of the resources like plows or crews or trucks to go and clear those kind of things. And one of the issues is even if you have, example, 100 dump trucks, you have to have 100 qualified, trained, experienced people to operate that machinery. And again, it takes a partnership. Just because you see trees down, until those trees have been made safe, the chainsaw crews can't really get to them. So there is a process. And when you have hundreds of these going on, it does take a lot of time. But I will say our local agencies and Duke Energy put a tremendous amount of resources towards it. But there's just so much, there's no way to accomplish it that quickly and safely.
So we could say that the number of, and I'm also talking, I don't know if this question is for you, but I'm also talking about the plows, the salt trucks, all of that would remain the same?
Well, I certainly don't want to answer for those that, with streets and utilities and DOT, but I think we do have an appropriate number of resources that typically are able to handle the load. But again, even when those crews, you only have so many people and they can't work 24 hours around the clock. It becomes a safety hazard when people spend 12, 14, 16 hours out in those conditions. They also have to rest. Again, it's just such a high volume of calls that creates a problem. Any other questions for myself or any other speakers? All right, thank you very much.